I'll just tell you this, sometimes in your life, miracles happen. The economy was crashing in 2008 in Florida. I was working in the city of Coral Springs. The person beside me got fired. The person on the other side of me got fired. The whole building department was almost empty because there was so little work. I thought my time is coming to an end very soon here. So I answered the tiniest little like want ad in a thing which said, seeking a public art manager for Times Square. And you know, you're never supposed to answer those things, right? If it's like that, it's usually some government agency or someone that has to advertise legally. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I was the manager of Times Square. It was a rather bizarre circumstance. It turned out to be a great experience, of course, but and I have lots of ideas about Times Square and how it works and what it does. And some of those are part of this presentation. The best way to see New Year's Eve on Times Square, do you see the McDonald's sign right there? Well, right there is an entrance to our offices where I worked. And so we could go to the bathroom whenever we wanted. We would just come out, which was the absolute best way to have to go to that event, because I don't have any idea how those people put up for 8 to 12 hours in order to be there. So of course this was the, I'm going to show you a little bit of history of Times Square because that's kind of interesting. So this is the history of kind of New Year's Eve as it got developed over time. At the beginning, there was no ball on top of the Times building. The place where the reason it's called Times Square is because that triangular building was the headquarters of the New York Times. And so that's why it's called Times Square. And then later what happens is that this building becomes completely abandoned in every way, and its only economic use is supporting the signs. And then the people that did the signs on the side of the building came up with this idea to do the dropping balls as a way to give prominence to their building, not as to rent the space, but as in the interior space, but rather to rent the signage space on the outside of the building. These are some of the early signs. One thing that's very important, when you see these early signs, they're all in black and white. They were not black and white. They were multicolored, as you can see with the one in the bottom cup location. Then they built the theaters, which came to Times Square. They then brought the parades through Times Square, 1924. It's Madison Square Gardens. The original one is one block off Times Square, where great boxing matches and other things happened for the whole city of New York. The signs really started coming in the 20s and the 40s. There was a guy named Douglas Lay, who was the prime designer of many of those famous signs that came during that time. And then as Times Square started to fall in decay with the city of New York, then Times Square became a place which was much more about sex, both in terms of performances and literally sex within the city. This is the kind of famous photograph of the kiss in Times Square for the end of World War II. But then when I was there, I had Tim Tompkins was the director of Times Square, and he was very assertive and trying to come up with kind of cool new things. So on VJ Day, he invited as many people as possible to come out and kiss each other on VJ Day. And so that became a kind of event. And he wanted to have these events as he tried to bring Times Square out of its dungeon. It was also a place, you probably don't know this, it was a big place for singers in the 40s to come. So Frank Sinatra, Elvis was very popular there. And then even, and then later MTV has its studio stations on Times Square. And I can't remember what it was called, TLC, something like that, where the famous singers would come in and talk but that it would also look out in Times Square, and all the young girls, just like they did for Frank Sinatra and they did for Elvis, would be standing outside the MTV studios trying to see, or maybe that hopefully that person would come down and say hello. Here you can see now what it really looked like in color. So this is the time period in which it, declined. And those were created in movies. Midnight Cowboy and Taxi Driver expressed that kind of feeling. Andy Warhol and the Beat Poets were there. A famous show in the early 80s called the Times Square Show started a whole new movement of art, which continued into the 80s. A famous photographer, Diane Arbus, she started out becoming famous by shooting pictures of people who had little strange physical attributes. And so in fact, Herbert's Flea Circus was a place where a lot of these people came and you like left them a tip or something like that in relationship. And so her career kind of started taking up pictures of many of these people. And then another artist, Jane Dixon, she made a career for herself of just doing zillions of these beautiful drawings or dark drawings of Times Square and the actions. The artists were kind of attracted to Times Square. This is Christo's proposal for a wrap of the Times building. That's the one with the ball on it. John and Yoko paid for this to be in Times Square. The war is over during the Vietnam War. Max Newhouse built, there's a sound, you can actually still hear it, at least you could a few years ago, in Times Square over a grate. When you stand there, you'll hear these funny sounds coming out of the interior. Artists, oh good, I have time. So artists, this was from the Public Art Fund, because Jane Dixon, that woman that I showed you who did those drawings, she got a job typing. This was the first billboard in Times Square, which had a digital use. So on the Times building, you can see before they start cladding the whole thing with signage. So she got a job where she just typed in the words and things that went on the board, right, for it to work. And so she went to the owner and said, hey, what do you think if artists did this instead of just me typing it in? And so it did start to happen, and she made it. The new Public Art Fund from 1982 to 1990 created all these, what they called the messages to the public. You can see Keith Haring up in the right-hand corner. Protect me from what I want. That's Jenny Holzer, a fantastic poet, public artist. Protect me from what I want. Other artists utilized, they were able to get hold of these abandoned billboards. So Jenny Holzer here too, as you walk down 42nd Street. A man can't know what it's like to be a mother. That's the kind of statements that she would make to the public. Another organization created this kind of giant billboard at the end of, this is on 42nd Street, but facing Times Square. Later, everything kind of got, of course, upgraded. So then things became more kind of video-like in terms of the work. Or this great one of the most popular would be on this one here, which was just a cat drinking milk, very popular one at the time. Then it moved that to the MTV billboard. So this is the MTV billboard that was on Times Square. There's a district. The district produced events. As I said, my boss, Tim, he was actually a yoga instructor. So he started on summer solstice, he started doing yoga in Times Square, which he just did it with himself and two friends the first year. And then it kept growing and growing and growing, and people loved to come to Times Square and participate in this event. And then eventually they would hire famous instructors, which also attracted people. Times Square is media, finance, entertainment, and signage in terms of the economics. Trump did not have a building in Times Square, but pretty much every other developer in New York had one. There was a lot of support for like freedom of expression in Times Square. There's the famous naked cowboy. I don't know why I have Miss Perry here in terms of this drawing, but there's a lot of, and actually New York City has a great deal of protections for freedom of expression for people on the street. People would come to us and say, how can I do something in Times Square? And we would say, well, you can apply to us and we'll help you do it, or you can just go do it, because actually artistic expression is so highly respected that unless you really cause people harm or block traffic in a funny way, they will let you do whatever you want in Times Square. So these were some of the art projects that I did when I was there. This was actually the Times Square district actually went all the way down to the bus terminal, Port Authority. And this artist, Tattfoo Tan, he believed that if you ate colors, these colors, he was a graphic designer, he matched colors to all the fruits, and he says, if you eat these colors, you will be healthy. But it was also just amazing what happened with that dark building when we put this just colorful grid on the space in terms of the psychology of the space. One thing that we learned, this was poetry in Times Square, that in fact, you can hear poets in Times Square. We learned that even in that crowded space, if you put the speakers every 10 to 15 feet as you go down, that's enough where people hear it quite correctly. Now, the other thing that's very important is that the tone in Times Square is the same as a man's baritone voice. In other words, the pitch of Times Square. So as a result, like this man here who's reading poems probably can hardly be heard by anyone. But the woman that's reading poems is probably very easy for everyone to hear. It's very odd, but it actually does work. When I was there, they were just finishing the Red Staircase, which was run, again, in terms of architecture, was won by 2 architecture students from Australia, in which it won the competition, but then everyone thought, well, I guess that'll never happen, blah, blah, blah. And then Tim Tompkins, the guy he basically took it out of the trash, in effect, and said, I want to make this happen in Times Square. So it's made entirely of glass. The 2 architects that won it, which are Choi and Rapina, they didn't have the contract to do it, but they worked with a local firm, which then helped it build, and the local firm was very respectful of their work. This was a video that came out, Jay-Z and Alicia Keys, where they used the staircase. And then this is a project, this is Mark Gage and Mark Clemenceau. This is the Valentine Heart, which started when I was there, another kind of event. So how do you make a kind of event for people to take pictures with? Because taking pictures is the #1 activity of all people in Times Square. Then in 2009, the director of Public Works for the city of New York finally convinced Mike Bloomberg, to say, okay, we're going to take a chance. We're going to close all the spaces. We're going to stop Broadway. So Broadway had 2 streets that go through it. I mean, Times Square, Broadway and 7th Avenue. And so that's what always made what they call the bow tie, because they cross. But now they were going to completely close Broadway. So if you came down Broadway, instead of going into Times Square, you would have to turn and go to some other street, east or west, or the other direction, which was actually a giant risk for Bloomberg in terms of the politics, in terms of how it would work. When Tim and I were in his office, and they were trying to think of what to do. And so somehow we came up with this idea to buy 400 lawn chairs for the day that it opened, which turned out to be, of course, very popular in sitting out there in Times Square by changing the way that people actually experience Times Square. And they turned out to be colorful. At the end of it, Jason Peters took the chairs and turned it into a sculpture when that was over, that period. And they were in pretty bad shape, as you might imagine. We brought in outdoor furniture from various manufacturers. It's just kind of like fun things to do. We had a project where people used, they were all kinds of games that you play with your phone that are geotagged. Doesn't work all that well in an urban environment, but they managed to come up with enough, like, digital golf and that kind of stuff, to make things work. And it was a whole festival of games. We brought in the Turkish Cultural Center, so we experimented with different kind of cultures coming into Times Square. This was a sculpture made for Obama, that Obama had already been elected. There was no support here, but they came in by Robert Indiana. You may know his love sculpture rather than the hope sculpture. Then Molly Dilworth, a very young artist, another just won an open competition completely out of 500 entries in which to paint Times Square, to paint Broadway, to make Broadway into this pedestrian zone for a short period of time until they could come up with what they were going to do permanently in terms of a surface. So she designed this, what she called Cool Water, Hot Island. I'm not going to kind of go through that. Here you can just see the way that people gather in Times Square. You can see people on the side of the red staircase. They're waiting in line to buy cheaper tickets. And then you can see there's an event going on of probably people playing music in which people gather around. These kind of open circles is a kind of common way that audiences are developed. These are just some more images of those works. This is the ice sculpture by two architects, Morehead and Morehead. The winter, the whole thing was supposed to melt slowly, but the winter was so cold that February, it didn't melt at all. So one of the guys from Times Square just went out there with a hot water and just melted the thing down. This is by Freecell. All the Valentine's hearts are created by architects. And so Freecell had this one where people had to lift the heart up and work at it together to make the heart come to life. This is by Burkhard Ingels. This one you touch and it senses the blood in your fingers, and so then the heart pumps at your rate. Now they do this. I should have had images, but when I was there, we just got permission to do this idea to link all the billboards so artists could do one project at 5 minutes before midnight. What I learned when I got there is that the billboard companies, they do not sell. Basically, when you buy time on a billboard, you're buying from 5 in the morning to midnight. And then from midnight to 5 in the morning, it's not being technically under contract. So as a result, I just started asking, is it possible to use that time frame? And they weren't willing to go all night, but this idea of doing something for 10 minutes seemed like a great idea. Now they do a magnificent job over the entire, rather than just a few images, which is where we started to do over the whole space. Times Square also became a place for performances. So you see the performance. This is everyone's holding a cell phone. The music's coming out of the cell phone and they're dancing as per the choreography as they wander. They actually went all the way down Broadway, all the way to the end of the island. Dancers. This is a series of music. So he's standing over the existing sound thing in Times Square that's underneath the grate by Max Newhouse. And now they're making new music in conjunction with that, like a kind of jazz improvisation. Artists would come in a short period of time. There's an artist who was dragging this nose sculpture everywhere so he could do these which he could do. I think we need to use those right now in certain locations in the world. This is about a fluorescent fish. There he is, the artist that made the giant fluorescent fish on the billboards. That doesn't show very well. This was a series of works on the billboards, which are right. You can see the ball up there above the 2011. So these are the billboards right south of down from the ball. Counting sheep. Of course, it was very popular. Kusik O made them out of paper. They're really beautiful. But the idea of a city that never sleeps. just sculptures in Times Square, but also you're seeing Times Square the way it is. These are brought in just as part of an art festival. We teamed. This was my favorite, one of my favorite pieces. This was right in the middle of the financial crisis, and Alexandre Arrechea on the NASDAQ board. He basically, you're not seeing, I should have a video that shows it swinging in and out and crashing against the NASDAQ board, the people who caused the crisis to take place, the financial institutions. But I learned in Times Square that unless you do something really obnoxious socially, like, like use F words, etc., on the billboards, the billboard companies don't care at all. And NASDAQ didn't care at all. No comments came back from this. This particular project did cause a lot of problems. This was interesting because this is a Cuban, Puerto Rican artist, Sofia Maldonado. She does these, she's a muralist. She does these human shapes in this kind of form you're seeing. And what happened is that a women's association in Harlem thought that we were insulting African-American young women by having these there. And we did do a lot of dialoguing with them. And one of the statements that I thought was very interesting is that they said, well, if this was done in Harlem, we wouldn't care. The fact that it's in Times Square is presenting this image of our young Black women to the world. So that was there was a lot of back and forth. The murals did stay up. Here she is. They were always very kind to say, we don't blame the artist. It's not the artist's fault. It's you, Mr. Weiss. That was what they pointed their finger at. Yes. This is another project where they kissed until the ice melted all the way through. Two Spanish artists. This was a dancing car, and they're doing break dancing, but the car is also dancing in Times Square. These kind of fake monuments. You can see it's just a billboard, but it absolutely works. Whenever you take a picture of it, it looks like it's Stonehenge because of the way the artist shaded it. Artist from Spain. This was a theatrical performance that took place on the staircase when people didn't know it was happening. And they were all flight sequences from famous movies. So they were all reacted out on the staircase. And so they were very dramatic with a lot of shouting and a lot of running. Just performances. This was one of the things that I believed is that Times Square was the center of New York, and that we should be reinforcing that. And Hamadi Takagi, she went out and she bought all these foods that are imported into New York City from various countries because there are so many people from those countries. And she called it Blender. And so it's all these photographs of all this food, which is not sold in Manhattan, but is sold in all the boroughs. And they were done on all the trash cans around Times Square. Urban Remix did a series there from Georgia Tech. They did a lot of, they got high school students. You may know there was even some movies about the High School of Performing Arts in New York City. I can't remember the names of the movies that they made, but actually it's right there in Times Square. And so the students from the High School for Performing Arts, they were sent with recording devices to go out and record sounds which they think reflected on Times Square and what it was. And we told them they had to stay in the public spaces. So, and I also find that it was interesting that they interpreted public spaces as like the first floor of Forever 21, right? In terms of the big retail spaces. And so a lot of the recordings were them talking to the cashiers or something else that they were doing, but it kind of shows a difference between the way that, architects and urban planners, we think of the word public space and what an average person might think the word public space means. when they're actually out in a space, because you can easily walk into Forever 21 or I can't remember who else was there easily. So it seems in that way the same definition as public. This is another one where people hug each other to come together. I think we might need that very much now. Maybe I should call Mr. Chung and see if he can come back. These are my favorite projects. This is meeting bowls. These were four bowls. I mean, they were like bowls, but they were basically places to come in and seat, and the bowls rocked like big rocking chairs. And the idea behind the Spanish artists called was that people need to have a way to informally meet each other people. And the idea was that once you're in that scale space, you will talk to the other people that are in the space about what's going on. That it's an appropriate size. This is a project by Christine Jones. She's a Tony Award winner for her stage design and Broadway plays. And so this was done by Locke Eck. You might know them, the architects. They designed it is a theater for one person to watch and one person to perform. When you pull back this red sliding door inside, then all of a sudden the audience and the performer are within 3 feet of each other, sitting there. And it's a really amazing experience to be in that kind of space with a talented performer. Of course, I did it. I had to do it. But then when you come out, it's like you left Times Square, because when you come out, you're so intensely involved with that performer for like 2 minutes that it's like you come out into the space and you can't comprehend what's going on around you, all this noise and all this stuff, right? You completely transported by just being into a dark space and being in such concentration with this other person. This is Performer. So this was in an alleyway in Times Square. By Adam Frank. And so if you stood in the spotlight was on all the time, you would hear applause. So you might walk through and then wonder what would happen, but some people would finally they would figure it out. And the more you kind of jumped up and down and acted silly, the louder and louder the applause got in the space. A very simple digital device. And this is my favorite project of all. This is by Paul Ramirez Jonas. And he said he did this whole project, which was a simple project. It was not a simple, it was a very complex project. He had a key, and that key opened 10 rooms in various museums around the city of New York. And you got a passport. And the idea, of course, was to go around and see everyone and check off your passport to see all these museums. And you were the only one in the museum that had the key to get in. Then you'd have to lock it again to see whatever thing he had created, right? And so he saw Times Square as the center of New York himself in order to make that happen. But as he went up there, I was talking to him and he said, I can't believe this is happening to me. I said, this was my whole goal, to be able to give the key to New York to the mayor of New York, as like the people giving the key rather than the mayor giving the key to someone special. So here he is. This is the moment in which he's giving the key to Bloomberg. The books are there too, because when you get the passport, you have to sign in, you have to sign your name, who you are. So they had a record of kind of who went out around the city. And here it is, I'm giving the key to someone. That was one of the PR books. So that was my little story of Times Square and my fantastic experience there for 3 years. So I don't know if that means anything, but you know, the way that architecture is invigorated comes through the people who are in it. And what they do there, how they approach the space. And those Times Square has a special psychological way of curiosity. One of the funniest things is that you could put any sign you put out in Times Square to just, you know, when you put a sign up somewhere for artwork, people usually don't read it, but in Times Square, people would always read the signs. They'd read it, they wonder what that is, and they'd read the sign to find out about it. there's a lot of this curiosity of kind of being a tourist and being in this public space. It kind of gives you a freedom also to not be yourself quite so much as another person, as you would be at your hometown, whatever. So there are all these different ways that have to do with, you know, that the space is not just the architecture. The space is the people within the space and how they react with each other and how they react with the buildings, how they are.